Hey everyone, it is Tiki time here at Cerulean Bay. This is Tom, and welcome to Tropical Escapes at Home. We hope you guys had a great week. We did here. We're working on all kinds of things, and we have a lot of material for you about Tiki that we will be sharing in some upcoming episodes with you guys. But for today, we're going to go ahead and just dive right in because there is a lot to talk about with this. Tiki is actually very, very cool. If you are familiar with it, you know what I'm talking about. And if you're not, you'll learn a lot about it. It is an interesting concept. It really evokes a lot of vibrant tropical imagery. It has a lot of amazing and colorful aspects to it, from its artwork to its cocktails. It represents a really laid back lifestyle. It's a great way to entertain. And once you know the history about it and where things come from in it, the idea of cultural appropriation kind of goes away. Because while there is a little bit of that in there, and we'll get into that most likely in the next episode, once you understand it, there is a whole lot more cultural appreciation than there is appropriation. And we'll talk about that and get into the details of it. But for now, let's just talk about what it is and how you can use it in decor, uh, where it came from, because that helps to apply it in different places in design. So, yeah, some people love it. Some people don't love it. They look at it as an exaggerated design style that's outdated or kind of silly. It can be silly or kind of kitschy looking if you overdo it. But there's some really cool things that you can do with it if you use it in the right way. Kind of like any other design style, when you're looking at nautical or some other specific type or period, too much of one thing is never a good thing. And the same thing can be said about tiki. So you don't want your tropical escape at home, or your entire home for that fact, to look like something that came out of Disneyland, where if you've ever been to Disneyland or Disney World and visited the Enchanted Tiki Room, you'll know what I mean. And if you haven't been, you can look it up online. It's really, really cool to go and visit. It's a lot of fun. I loved it as a kid, but you wouldn't want your whole house looking like that because it'd be a little over the top. So for now, let's get into what is Tiki, and then we'll get into the birth of the Tiki culture, the golden age of it, the decline that it experienced in the 70s and 80s, how it has resurged. There's a big resurgence of it that started back in the 90s, and how we are actually in a period of modern day Tiki today. So let's just go ahead and take a look at what the word Tiki means. The word tiki actually comes from the native language of New Zealand, the Maori language, and it refers to the first carved image or representation of the human form or of man. And it was created by the Maori gods. So tiki is literally the first man created by these gods. And the word tiki comes from this language, and it refers to the first mortal in Maori mythology. The original carved images were typically made from greenstone or some other local stones, and they were ornamental pendants which were worn around the neck. And the phrase in Maori, "Hei Tiki," which is Hei, and then the word tiki, was used to wish people wisdom and safe passage across the oceans and fertility and families. And it was a very positive thing to wear and then have people acknowledge, because the word hey in the Maori language means to be fortunate and happy. So tikis are considered to be a treasured, valuable family heirloom. If anybody has any originals from way back then, in the Maori culture, they were passed down among the generations to descendants. There was a lot of meaning that stayed with these pieces, a lot of value, because in that culture, there's a lot of connection to ancestral guidance. So that, I think, would be a very, very cool thing to see one day if we could ever get down to New Zealand and see maybe some of the museums and cultural centers there where the tikis originated. And speaking of that, we'll get into the concept and region of Polynesia here in a minute. But if you ever do get down to Tahiti, there is a national museum there where they have a display large display actually, where they showcase and chronicle the origination of tiki from New Zealand across Polynesia and how it evolved from these little pendants to some of the giant wooden statues or totem pole like things that you can see. So, actually, very, very interesting if you're into South Pacific culture like we are. But getting back to the tikis here, they did start out as these pendants, and then over time, people were beginning to carve small statues from different stone or from wood, and they kind of had a kind of humanoid form to them. If you look at imagery online for these, they were not made, proportionally to the human body. They just kind of had an odd humanoid form, and they too were meant to be symbols of creation and fertility. And over time, these statues grew and they turned into larger wooden carvings and they started to be used in different religious ceremonies. And that's what is chronicled in this museum in Tahiti. So that it has turned into what we know today for different tikis and statues and carvings that represent the different deities and gods and ancestral figures. It's all a long line of traditional art forms. It started in New Zealand, made its way across Polynesia, into Hawaii. Hawaii is part of the Polynesian region, even though it's in the North Pacific. Very, very interesting to take a look at. But for us here in the US, we are going to look at the birth of the tiki culture as we know it. That did start here in the 1930s, and it was based on artwork and information that was brought back to the US and to Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries when the European explorers were doing their thing throughout the South Pacific, exploring and trading and acting as missionaries and encountering local peoples there as they discovered new islands. All of that, as these artwork and pieces and information were brought back to the US, is what helped to spark the whole Western fascination with the South Pacific, this exotic allure of Polynesia. And there was a big allure to this because back then people were not able to travel at all like you can today. So they really were limited to what they were shown as these pieces made their way home and what they heard from explorers or those who were able to make these long journeys. But just quickly to cover the Polynesian region for people who are not familiar with it, I'm really into geography. I believe it's really important to know where countries from the smallest to the largest are located on our planet. I love maps and just looking at where things are and what things used to be called compared to what they're called today. And when you look at the South Pacific, obviously people are familiar with Hawaii, they're familiar with New Zealand and Australia and even Fiji. There's a lot of other islands in there which are really worth it to get to know or to know about. If you are fortunate enough to be able to travel to a place like Fiji or to Tahiti, maybe you could take some extra time and travel to neighboring islands. They're different island nations. While they might at first glance look the same and appear to be all the same, they're really not. The art forms are similar, but they're different. There are a lot of cultural differences, differences in language, differences in food, local music. It really is worth it to take some time to travel around if you are fortunate enough to get down to that area. But in Polynesia, you have New Zealand, which is in the southwestern part, and it just kind of skirts past Fiji. Fiji is actually not part of Polynesia like people think it is, but the islands of Tonga are in there. As I said, Hawaii to the north. And then you get into French Polynesia and Tahiti, kind of towards the eastern side, all the way over to Easter Island, which is just off the coast of South America. So that is the Polynesian area. It's kind of triangle shaped. Fiji is actually part of Melanesia, or the Western South Pacific. It appears to be a smaller area. That's where, Papua New Guinea is, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, the Solomon Islands, Kiribati. These are places that are in the Melanesia region. And then there's Micronesia to the north. That's the Northern Mariana Islands. There's Guam, the Marshall Islands. So, yeah, there's your bit of South Pacific geography. But yeah, pull out a map, take a look. It's very interesting. But getting back to our golden age of tiki here, how it really kicked off in the US after people were becoming familiar with these art forms is when a guy named Ernest Gantt, otherwise known as Don Beach, and Don was spelled with two N's. I don't know why, but Don Beach. He opened his first bar in Los Angeles in 1933. And this was after he had traveled extensively through the South Pacific and absolutely fell in love with it, which is probably what I would have done had I been born back then and traveled too. Because when I went down there, just absolutely loved it. But because he had a restaurant, he was into food and just any kind of local drinks or cocktails that might exist. And he picked up a lot of influence, and it inspired him to open Don the Beach Comber, which was a tropical themed bar that featured exotic island decor. It had the bamboo furniture and the palm trees, and he created cocktails that were inspired by the flavor of the islands. Obviously, you have things like pineapple and guava and a lot of citrus, the orange juice and mango. And so you have all of these flavors that he brought into cocktails, which previously didn't exist here in the US. So his bar, which was in LA, really, really took off, and it became incredibly popular, especially after World War II. So, as returning soldiers were coming back from the Pacific Islands down there, they had their stories of what they saw and souvenirs from these tropical paradises. And it just kind of fueled this new cultural movement. And it created this whole new concept of being able to go out to these real tropical styled bars where you could just kind of get away and escape and enjoy a really, really great cocktail. And shortly after Don Beach made his trip in 1933, Victor Bergeron, who in 1934, he was from Oakland, and he's actually was credited for creating the first Mai Tai, for anybody who might not know. But Trader Vic's became another iconic restaurant. It was in the Oakland area in California. And he too, after traveling, used Polynesian motifs and wanted to create that kind of combined tropical look, which is tiki now as we know it. And he too created different cocktails and things using the ingredients that he found there. And we do have a Mai Tai recipe, which is based on the classic recipe on our website. And it includes a bit of the story in there, which it's actually quite interesting how he developed the Mai Tai and why it's called the Mai Tai. So you'll have to go to our website, ceruleanbay.com. And we do have a cocktail section in the menu. It's small, but we're growing it. But the Mai Tai recipe is there. So there you go for that. But moving on here, once Victor's restaurant was really taking off, and again, soldiers coming home from the war who lived in that area were going, it just created a whole new concept for the general public to go out. And it was almost like going to the theater, even though there was no live acts. Just being in these tiki styled places, as they were called, was just a whole new dining experience. And with that came the imagery, came the artwork, the scantily clad ladies and the bikinis or the tight fitting floral dresses with the floral lay around the neck and the flower in the hair, serving cocktails to crowds. And, the average person probably didn't realize that that's not how it really was down there, but that was the image that was coming back. And for a war weary country that really went through a rough time during the war, just in terms of morale and all of this, and with the economy, going to a tiki bar was a great place to escape. It was just going to this exotic land without leaving your city. This is also when the word tiki started to become more of an adjective instead of a noun. The little concept of the pendant worn around the neck got completely lost in all of this. And the statues and any kind of totem pole type of pieces now were just kind of tiki artwork. So yeah, the word tiki now was a way to describe a particular look or an entertainment style. And it continued to evolve as it was inspired by the myths and the artwork and just the overall aesthetics of Polynesia. And it continued to grow into the mid 20th century. It actually became a big kind of subculture. It was an American phenomenon back then. And it really defined a particular way of interior design and fashion, food and music and entertaining. I would say that, in all of the research that we did here, the tiki culture really peaked during the post World War II era. That's when escapism was at its strongest. The returning servicemen continued to bring back their stories, and probably a lot of that was embellished when it came to what you could enjoy down there in terms of the women and the alcohol and all of this. After having been down there, it's kind of hard to make a connection between the two based on what I saw, but I am not the expert. But by this time, the tiki culture, it was a reprieve. It was a relief from the anxieties of modern day life. And for many, it just was a simple version of paradise, a place where the stresses of daily life could be forgotten. And as the US moved into the 1950s and 60s, it really became a part of pop culture. It was around this time, actually in 1959, that Hawaii became the 50th state. And after that event, tiki bars were booming and tiki style architecture began to appear in residential and commercial buildings. This is when new restaurants were being built in tiki style. I remember back in LA as a kid, in the 70s, I remember as a kid seeing some of these. And, I thought they were just the coolest places. But this is where tiki style art and home decor were super popular. And things like rattan and wicker and anything bamboo was real popular for furnishings. A lot of artwork was kind of bold and exaggerated. Some of it kind of had a cartoonish look to it. They were all based on things that were actually in the islands, but it just kind of done in a tasteful cartoon fashion, I would say. But nonetheless, just it didn't depict real life, but it was all part of that escapism and part of that cool look in this tiki inspired pop culture. More places were opening up that were just with the lush tropical interiors and the thatched roofs and full of towering statues. And it was in the 60s that new cocktails really started to come onto the scene. You had drinks like the Scorpion and the Zombie. The Pina Colada was actually invented around that time. And they were just served in these really crazy looking cocktail glasses and tiki mugs, and they had full of flowers and fruit garnishes and pineapple leaves and just everything that screamed tropical in South Pacific. It was around this time too that movies were coming out. The movie South Pacific came out, I believe, during the 1950s. Songs like Blue Hawaii. So now entertaining in tiki style was not just in restaurants, it was happening in people's homes. This is where backyard tiki parties started to come around, Polynesian inspired cooking. Tiki torches started coming around for home use around this time. This was, it's funny when you read about the limbo pole and limbo, just that whole concept, because that was a big part of tiki culture back in the 60s. And limbo didn't have anything to do with the South Pacific. That was actually a game and a dance that originated on the island of Tobago down near Trinidad, which is off the coast of Venezuela for anyone who might not know. But that's a Caribbean thing that started back in the 1800s. And limbo went mainstream, just as a side note, in the 1950s. It was really popular entertainment in Trinidad after it had been adopted as kind of like a physical fitness routine for American troops. It became kind of a competition and a game associated with music that you would try to scoot your way under this bar as it was lowered, and it was lowered more and more until nobody could kind of get their way under there. And then if you could get it to the lowest setting, then they gradually raised it again. But yeah, the limbo, that's definitely a Caribbean way of entertaining, and it was unofficially blended in with tiki style at parties. And I guess just because it was fun and it was tropical, nobody cared. So there you go. That's your little note about limbo. But it was the whole concept of tiki was just a huge thing in the 50s and 60s. People had a lot of fun with it. They didn't really look at where it came from in terms of authenticity. Back then, people were not nearly as offended by everything as they are today. But as I said, we'll look into this to see where there is some legitimate concern and, and versus what is truly harmless. But after this happened in the 60s, tiki actually went into a period of decline. I really think the decline of the tiki culture started to appear in the 1970s. And based on the research I've done and just kind of from what I remember, um, yeah, everything as a kid back in the 70s, because I was born in the mid 60s, um, it was kind of already in the past. There was nothing current going on with tiki. I remember people had a tiki bar maybe in their backyard, or if somebody was throwing a tiki party, it was like something that your parents did. So it was already on the decline in the 70s. And I think this is because it was during the 60s that air travel was just a lot more accessible to the general public. And after Hawaii became a state in 59, people were just really starting to travel more. And in doing that, they were seeing for themselves firsthand what it was like in a lot of these locations. Hawaii became a very popular place to travel back then. People were traveling to Australia. And on their way, there were the Pacific Islands there. Fiji is very close to Australia and New Zealand. Tahiti was becoming a very popular place to go. So I think people were seeing for themselves, hey, wait a minute. All of these things that I saw, growing up, or the imagery, this isn't what it's like. This isn't what real life is down here. They don't do this. They don't look like that. And that's where the separation between what was real and what was romanticized and then commercialized began to happen. So I think that's when the love of tiki began to fade. In the 70s, people were becoming much more conscious about social preferences and attitudes. That's when people started to care more about what was culturally appropriate. And yeah, so tiki began to appear outdated, kind of kitschy, kind of a false touristy type of thing. And it, yeah, it just kind of started to fade out. And then what really didn't help was when disco started to come around in the late 70s. So by that point, many tiki bars and restaurants had to have completely transformed themselves in order to survive, or, they had to adapt to changing tastes. But a lot of them closed. And the whole thing with disco, that was a completely different concept. It was all the rage by the late 70s. And when I was doing my research, I came across someone who had said that that is when the tiki torch had burned out. So even though there were no specific drinks or food recipes that were associated with disco, by the time 1980 rolled around, a lot of tiki bars and restaurants had gone out of business. And you would have thought that maybe that was just the end of it, but what's funny is there was a resurgence of it. By the mid 1990s and the early 2000s, you now had a new generation of young people that were growing up, and they were getting their own apartments and owning their own homes, and they might not have been into what was in style or in trend in the 90s and early 2000s for home design. And it was funny for me because I was just seeing this new appreciation for what was now called mid-century. And I'm like, okay, they put a really cool name on something that was very 50s and 60s, which, I was familiar with as a kid. And now suddenly it was this thing that was in style. So yeah, it was kind of funny. But it included a lot of interior design and decor styles from the 50s and 60s. And by this time, the internet was coming onto the scene. So people had access to a lot of information at one's fingertips. So you had this whole new generation's fascination with retro looks. I think that's when I really started to hear the term retro being used all over the place. But these retro looks and aesthetics were suddenly really popular. And along with this, there was a renewed interest in tiki as a vintage design style. And I've always loved tiki as a design style. If you take the entertainment aspect out of it, which I do think is a lot of fun, but if you take out the thatched roofs and the bar by the poolside and all of that, and you look at the furnishings that they had then, the colors they had, it's really, really cool. It's tropical. It's kind of just a retro tropical look that I think is awesome. And that was one of the things that inspired me to go ahead and do this series of Tiki blog posts and now sharing this information in a podcast because it's really, really cool. And as the look of Tiki started to become popular again, I think what helped kind of a renaissance in Tiki restaurants and bars, what helped is having the internet because now as people were researching new looks and new ways to decorate, there were also suggestions for other things related to Tiki. And that's where bars and restaurants could now have a new way of advertising, being found. And so in the early 2000s, new Tiki bars and restaurants were showing up. There was now a new focus, though, on not going back to the way they were. And I did some research on this too. For people who were opening a lot of these bars and restaurants, there was a focus on authentic Polynesian cultural designs rather than solely recreating the retro look of the 50s and 60s. People were now doing their homework and trying to incorporate more of an authentic look. And I just thought that was the coolest thing because the authentic look is wonderful. It's beautiful. There was no reason to not have it to begin with, but there's a lot of very nice Tiki and Polynesian inspired restaurants and bars that you can go to today that are, they still have that bit of Tiki fun to them, but the design styles are definitely more authentic. And I noticed this when I was in Fiji and really traveled around and purposely went to a number of bars and restaurants just to look at and see what did they look like. And, you can go to the big hotel chains like the Marriotts and the Sheratons. And I made a day of it to go and visit these hotel lobbies and their restaurants and bars and their pool areas just to see how they were done. And then could easily see that, yeah, some of the cool Tiki bars and restaurants we know of here in the States, they're done in the same way. I mean, as I said, they still kind of have that retro Tiki flair to them, but there's a whole lot of use of authentic artwork and just the look. Very, very cool places. So I think another thing I should really mention here, if you are interested in learning more about this, is you get on Facebook. I think there is a lot of great stuff on Facebook. That's where I've also learned a lot about just the different looks and things that are possible because there are some groups on there where they've got hundreds of members, if not thousands, who are genuinely dedicated to building their own Tiki bars and spaces. And some of them want to go full tilt and go full crazy with it. And then other people want to just have a little bit of inspiration here and there. And one of the groups that I found was theming Tiki bars. So if you're on Facebook, you can look up theming Tiki bars. You can also look up the Fugu Lounge. It's Fugu, but the Fugu Lounge is really cool. And these are people who have turned Tiki into a true art style. It's really, really cool what people are doing, creating a lot of imagery and effects on their own for people who are very handy and who are very DIY or do it yourself. I'm blown away by what some people are able to create on their own. I am not a handy person. That's just not my thing. But when I see what some people are able to do, it's like, oh my gosh, that is totally cool. So yeah, if Tiki is of interest to you in terms of a design style for your home and for entertaining, check it out on Facebook, Theming Tiki Bars and the Fugu Lounge. I'm sure there's other groups as well on Facebook. There's one that I came across the other day, and I don't have the name with me here, but it's about recipes. They share cocktail recipes and things. And it's another very educational way to learn about what classic cocktails are like compared to a lot of what is out there today. I think today's bar and cocktail scene is really also helping to breathe new life into Tiki culture because as I mentioned with these recipes, it is very important to understand how they were originally made because a lot of tropical drinks that are out there today they're not even close to the originals. Back when these drinks were invented, they didn't have mixes and artificial fruit flavors and all of this. And there are a lot of drinks out there today sold as tropical, which they're just overly sweet and they're just not even close to the original. So yeah, I would definitely check out the tropical drink recipes online, classic ones. And in these Facebook groups, if you're on Facebook, just check out what you can find there because you will encounter people that do their homework. They take the time to research things. This is their passion, perhaps. And you can really, really learn a lot from where these things actually came from. Having all of this information be available online now is just so cool because, for modern day tiki enthusiasts, you can just learn so much more about where tiki came from, what it is, why it is the way it is. You can be more attuned to cultural identities and realities. There's just so many interesting things when it comes to Polynesian and Pacific cultures. And I love to honor that. I completely respect it. It's just really interesting. It's fascinating for me. And not just these cultures. There's other parts of the world too that I'm very interested in because you just want to see things for how they were. Where did people really come from in this sense with their cultures and why do things happen the way they do in certain countries and when it comes to art forms and decor and then food and cocktails and things like that. Just super super interesting. I think now as more people are embracing the authenticity of a culture's identity and the aesthetics, it really does help people to understand the different cultures. They can appreciate things more. And then that's where you'll learn about what is appropriation. And we'll get into that in our next episode. I do have some information to share about cultural appropriation when it comes to tiki, when it comes to the history of tiki. Maybe some of those older art forms appeal to you. There's a lot of really, really cool retro stuff out there. And when you look at the different colors that are used, those are very helpful when it comes to putting paint on the walls or wallpaper or prints, different artwork, just the use of color in a space. And then if you are one who loves to entertain and you want to have some kind of a tropical themed event, even have a luau or something like that, knowing tropical recipes and looking up some authentic ones and seeing how those ones were made, and throw in some cocktails, alcoholic and non-alcoholic. How were these things blended together so you can get an authentic tropical experience in a tiki celebration? I That would just be super fun. I think it would be super cool to do. Just one other quick note too that I should mention is a lot of these things with cooking and cocktails have become popular because of the cooking channels and things that you can see on TV. And there are a few things that we've seen on Food Network and on other shows where Polynesian food, Caribbean cooking, so tropical cooking in general is gaining in popularity. I think if you look up tiki cuisine, you can find some things, maybe some older episodes in these channels, but that's another great source. And the cool thing there is you can see how people are actually making it. Maybe even on YouTube, getting on there and digging around if you're into YouTube. People who are making authentic foods and drinks, that's another good source, if you want to do some good tropical entertaining. So I think you can see that the influence of tiki today extends way beyond bars and restaurants and anything in the past that has to do with its history because it is popular in art and in home decor again. It can easily be incorporated into tropical design and even in limited amounts in contemporary design. So when you have a very clean line look in your house, a little bit of tiki and tropical, just as some minor accent energy there can really create a whole new vibe in contemporary design. So don't forget about that. Even if you're not really into the whole tropical design style or you only want a little bit of it, choosing those right elements can really make a big deal. And then you can have that touch of tropical without it overpowering. It really does look wonderful when it's used in measured amounts, and it can add that retro tropical look. And what's really cool, if you find that you are now a tiki lover and find that tiki is your thing, or you do want to use more of it, give it some thought because you can really have a lot of fun creating your own tiki style. You can mix elements of the whole mid-century look that we talked about with the more surfer and beachy look. Think Jimmy Buffett and his parrot head followers. You've got that whole Key West vibe, the thatched roof on the beach surfer type of thing, which in and of itself is not tiki, but it's that tropical beach style. You can combine that with Caribbean style and even a bit of pirate themes if you want. Think Pirates of the Caribbean. When you watch those movies, I noticed some scenes and imagery in there which you can use as decor inspiration for your house, just the way certain parts of the movie sets were done up. There are certain things that you can do in your house to bring in a bit of that past. There is some authenticity to it. So that can also be kind of mixed in to your own tiki style that you create. And I think we're going to go ahead and turn that into an episode too, though, because there's a lot of detail in there that we can get into, which I think would be really, really helpful for people who want to do some redecorating or, just changing up a place in your house to create your tropical escape. But as I said, the cool part about it is that you can create your own style. And with that, it brings back that escapism that people were enjoying back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. You can have that escapism in your own tiki bar, both indoors and outdoors. Like I said, it's coming back, and there's a lot of great stuff available online. You can get on social media. That's another great place to find referrals to buy stuff too. People in these groups, they refer each other to different places that you can source things, and you can really create a really, really fun look with some of that stuff. There are events that you can go to. I didn't know about this. I just discovered these recently, but tiki enthusiasts have their own events, which are open to the public. There's the Tiki Oasis, which is held at the Town and Country Hotel in San Diego. I believe it's once a year. There's the Hook Ilau, if I am saying that correctly, the Hook Ilau in Pompano Beach, Florida. They have their annual event. And again, they're open to the public. These are people from around the world, and they celebrate music, art, food, and of course, a lot of cocktails. But as an attendee, you can learn about the history of tiki as well. Just all the vibrant tropical design styling that's available, just about tiki culture in general. So yeah, if going to one of these places, either in San Diego or in Pompano, is your thing, you should go ahead and check it out. I mean, tiki is a really interesting mix of Polynesian cultures, historical events, artistic interpretations. It's all of these things combined into kind of a complex story, but the culture, it has evolved over the years. And it remains a fun and vibrant part of design styles today for indoors and outdoors. I think it is just, as I said, a unique way to explore that concept of escapism while still being creative at the same time and giving you a fun way to entertain. I really don't think it's a fleeting trend anymore. I think it's going to be around because more and more people understand it, they respect it, they know the cultures from which it comes, and it is an American phenomenon. I think it really is, as it's not a fleeting trend. I think it's got its place in American culture, and it's up there with all of the other design styles that are available. It really is for people who want to connect, who want to have a bit of adventure without leaving home, and of course, who want a taste of paradise. So we really do encourage you to visit us at ceruleanbay.com, and you'll find our blog post there. We have a tiki section in our menu under Cerulean Lifestyles. And yeah, check out our post there. There's some really, really cool imagery, some great details. You'll get lots of ideas and inspirations. And check us out on Patreon. We have our membership levels there, and we really do appreciate your support. Anything you do really does help us out. So until next time, we wish you an awesome week. We will get more out there in our next episode about Tiki, some other great topics involving this really interesting area of design. And yeah, until then, have a great week. And we wish you a lot of fun, a lot of tropical dreams. Make those tropical dreams come true. So take care, and we will visit again soon. Bye bye.